Psycho Schematics. In the modern era of football, we've seen some major adaptations and changes to the way the game has been played over the years from the beginning of its inception. With adjustments and eventual change of evaluation of the general schemes and strategies in this current era of football, that the changes of general values of certain positional players in the grand scheme of the overall analytics of the style of the play of the game of different eras. This video will be describing my list and my concepts of the value of each position based on the modern style of football. Now, my list will be going from least valuable to most valuable. So, starting off my video at the least valuable position is the fullback position. The fullback position is now widely considered to be the least valuable position in the college level and on the NFL level today, with an increased emphasis on spread formations and an increased rate of passing attempts with a higher emphasis on getting rid of the ball quickly within the West Coast offensive style schemes. The fullback isn't as much of a necessity and isn't as vital to the game as it once was in the past when running the ball had much more emphasis and lead blockers were much more utilized within the game structure. Now, that doesn't mean that fullbacks are completely useless. It just simply means that they're not as valuable as they once were within the game structure of the current game the way it's played today. There are some coaches that don't even believe in using a fullback. There are some coaches that don't look at fullbacks at all. They use tight ends and convert them into the fullback position. So, in most organizations, for the most part, they still may use a fullback, but they may not average when it comes to timing to actually sign a contract or to sign a new contract once their old contract is up, and they don't have as much leverage in terms of how much money they could overall demand because their value has so harshly reduced and declined over time. However, fullbacks can still be useful in short yardage situations, goal line situations, or play types where they have a power running structure with a power running back that demands to have a lead blocker guide them along the way. And there are still some running backs who prefer to run with lead blockers in the league. So overall, they still have a use, but they definitely deserve them to be the least valuable in this list. The next position on my list is running back. Running back's general value has been on the decline over the past decade of football, especially on the college and NFL level. With an increased emphasis on passing the ball, spread West Coast offense, and air raid style offense, the game has seen higher levels of gradual decline for the workhorse three down style running back. In the modern era, general managers consider running backs to be expendable, and they think they deteriorate too quickly to really give them massive, lucrative contracts. So that's why you see running backs get undervalued and in general underpaid based on the wage scale when you analyze wide receivers and running backs around the league. An A to B graded running back could still be very useful in a team's production on offense. However, in the grand scheme of the general analysis about the way the modern style football is played, the running back position isn't as important or integral as it once was in the past generations of football. And you can tell by just watching the most highly productive offenses. They're mainly built around a dominant offensive line, an elite quarterback, and excellent wide receivers, or an excellent wide receiver tandem with a good tight end. But like I said before, in modern era football, the value of the running back position has clearly been on the decline. And as we see right now, that may not be changing anytime soon based on the
Next on my
rule
list is the
changes and the way the
4-3
game is
style
played.
outside linebacker. Styles of usage for outside linebackers vary depending on roster configuration, play calling, roster philosophy, coaching philosophy, and scheme. Within football, there are two different types of outside linebacker prototypes, the 4-3 and 3-4 style outside linebacker. Now, in this case, I already stated that the 3-4 style outside linebacker is more valuable than the 4-3 style. The main reason for my opinion on that is the game planning, play calling concepts, and responsibilities that separate the two styles of outside linebackers. A 4-3 style outside linebacker's main responsibilities are gap control when put in a run defending situation and dropping into coverage as an additional coverageman. They are also used in blitz packages on occasion, but typically are not as polished in terms of their pass rushing technique as opposed to a 3-4 style outside linebacker. Typically, 4-3 style outside linebackers aren't as versatile as 3-4 style outside linebackers. Woo! Next position on my list is the safety. The safety is a unique player. In the modern NFL, safeties need to be very versatile players because of the multitudes of defensive concepts in use in today's game. There are some defensive coordinators that only see their safeties as the last line of defense in a deep cover 2 style zone coverage type of play or cover 3. Other defensive coordinators, however, see their safeties as the defensive catalyst for wreaking havoc on the defensive side of the ball, crashing the box, blitzing, cutting off passing lanes, shifting positions to disguise play calling. Safeties are some of the most unique types of defenders in the NFL because of how versatile they need to be in order to be great in this game, depending on their defensive coordinator and how they use them. However, safeties aren't higher on the list because of the general predictability and today's defensive play calling trends in the college and the NFL. Next on my list is the tight end position. In modern college and NFL style play calling, tight ends are typically used as short route, short yardage targets as safety valves for the quarterback to use as a safe option over the middle of the field. In running plays, based on the tight end's field positioning, they typically set the edge by blocking the outside linebacker or the defensive end on their side in order to create a running lane for the running back to cut after the outside. Tight ends also used as blockers in pass plays in the moments where the offensive play caller expects a defense to call a heavy blitz. Tight ends are pretty versatile players based on how most teams use them in today's game. However, they aren't higher on my list because historically, looking back at the most prolific offenses in the history of the game on offense and on college and NFL levels, I realized that tight ends were not always as viable and as important in the grand scheme of those offensive teams as their fellow wide receivers, which made me realize that their value wasn't as high in general. Next on my list is the middle linebacker position. The middle linebacker position in college and NFL level is considered to be the leader and signal caller of the defensive unit. Typically, middle linebackers are the defensive captains and are the players that tend to show the most awareness, IQ, and show the most instinct on defense. They typically responsible for setting the order for their defense, telling their defensive teammates what the play call is on defense, dropping coverage, read and react in order to attack the backfield and run defense situations, and they also blitz on occasion depending on the play calling tendencies. But essentially, they're called the quote unquote the quarterbacks of their defense, and they need to be very aware and they need to be understanding of what's going on in the situations throughout the game. They need to be watching film on a consistent basis in order to understand what the offense is doing, and they need to have the instincts and the ability to sense what's going on throughout the game in order to be able to read and react and tell the defense and get the defense in the right situations, the right defense in order for the team to succeed as a whole. And teams that rely on their middle linebackers in order to be the defensive captains It's a major responsibility for them to be able to step up and execute their role, not only as a leader on the defense, but also to play their part and actually step up and play well. Next on my list is the cornerback position. Now, the college and NFL level is considered to be more passing leagues. That means that the value and importance of the cornerback position will also increase along with those tendencies. Now, along with the play calling using more sub-package spread formations, it also means that a defensive roster needs more depth at the cornerback position now more than ever before in the history of the game. B to A plus graded cornerbacks have a potential to boost a decent defense to an elite defense in a very short period of time based on the passing increase in passing tendency and the overall importance of the wide receiver in the modern age of the college level and professional level football. The reason that the cornerback position is not higher on my list is due to the rule changes that help benefit the pass catchers on offense. Those rule changes ultimately lower the value of the cornerback relative to their compared value to the wide receiver in the modern style of football. Next on my list is the wide receiver. Wide receivers have increased in value over the last decade based on the fact that wide receivers make the majority of the big plays in the passing game. Typically are the players that possess the speed and athletic ability to make the explosive plays, and also have an increased usage of sub-package and passing plays, which means that the majority of the time they're going to be on the field more often than the other positions, the other skill positions. Then you need to consider the rule changes and the increased likelihood of the penalty illegal contact. All these factors play a role into the increasing the value of the wide receiver position in the modern style of football. I would say that slot receivers have a slightly more valuable position than wide receivers because of how they're used in most offenses in the modern era as a short route, close to proximity receiving option for quarterbacks for most offensive game plans, similar to how most offensive coordinators use tight ends. The main difference is that they're shiftier, they're faster, and they're quicker out of their breaks and cuts. Next on my list is offensive guards. Offensive guards are a very important part of the overall foundation, not only of the offensive line, but the offense as a whole. Having a solid offensive guard is especially important for a quarterback that lacks speed, athletic ability, or lacks the ability to be able to throw accurately on the run or off platform or off their back foot. Immobile pocket passers must have a clean interior pocket to step up in and throw a clean, accurate pass. And offensive guards play a very important role in keeping the interior pass rush from wrecking the offensive passing game. In the running game, it's up to offensive guards to be able to set the tone in the interior, imposing their will and making sure the defensive tackles do not wreck the interior rushing lanes, to allow running backs to have the gaps to be able to run through within the offensive line. Next on my list is center. Centers are responsible for protecting the interior of the offensive line as well for the passing game, setting up the interior gaps for the running game, and also being the leader of the offensive line. Centers are the leader offensive line and are responsible for communicating with the rest of the offensive line in order to make sure that they understand the blocking scheme, the protection reads, the checks, and when any adjustments are made in those reads and checks on the blocking assignments, they communicate with the rest of the offensive linemen to make sure they understand what's going on. So essentially the centers are the quarterbacks, quote unquote, of the offensive line because they're the communicators and the general leaders of the offensive line, and it's up to them to make sure the offensive line understands what's going on within the play at all times, and that's why they're the centers, because they see the field at depth. Next on my list is the offensive tackle. Most of the elite level pass rushers in the NFL and college football are defensive ends or edge pass rushing outside linebackers. So in order to deal with those excellent edge pass rushers, teams realized that the high graded offensive tackles would become very important, especially since the offensive game revolves around passing in the modern era. Offensive tackles are responsible for helping create running lanes for those stretch running plays that expand towards the outside in order to create space for big running plays. And obviously, they are mainly responsible for holding those edge rushers at bay, which makes them extremely valuable in the modern era of football today. Next on the list is defensive end. As the college and professional levels of football focus more on passing, the defensive side of the ball puts more emphasis on finding high grade disruptive pass rushers. Defensive ends play a major role in providing the pass rushing pressure for a defense. They are also responsible for setting the edge on the run defense when the football carrier attempts to stretch the field on the run towards the outside. Defensive ends in the 4-3 style have more space to operate and typically have a greater impact in the game in comparison to a 3-4 style defensive end. 4-3 style defensive ends have the spacing and the structure to be able to maneuver around towards the edge and towards the outside, while 3-4 defenders are more in towards the 5 gap and the 4 gap and are more compressed, and they honestly play more like a defensive tackle, in my personal opinion, which is why 4-3 defensive ends typically are able to create pressure at a greater level because they have more spacing towards the outside. Next on my list is 3-4 style outside linebackers. 3-4 outside linebackers are vaunted pass rushers on the edge. The reason I value them more than I value defensive end is the overall versatility they possess in comparison to defensive ends. Some 3-4 outside style linebackers have the ability to play decent man coverage as a disguise, drop into zone coverage, have excellent pass rushing technique on one player. I think that's quite impressive, and provides a great amount of flexibility for a defensive play caller, which makes them even more valuable to a defense as a whole. Also, that unique skill set and flexibility makes it much more difficult for offensive coordinators to game plan against them because they can wreck their defensive game plan, their offensive game plan in so many different ways. And like I said before, that makes them even more valuable in the grand scheme of the entire game and how it's played because you can use them in so many different ways because of their versatility. Next on my list, the second most valuable position in the game today, the defensive tackle. The defensive tackle is responsible for providing pressure in the interior of the defensive line in order to create a disruptive force in pass defense or use that interior pressure to negate an offense's interior running game. The reason I think the defensive tackle has the potential to completely wreck an offense's production is that they have a high level of pass rushing ability and the strength and explosiveness to shed blocks and disrupt the running game. Elite high graded defensive tackles have always been of high value in any era of this sport's existence, so nothing has really changed from their value standpoint. However, in the modern era, they put more emphasis on a defensive tackle's ability to be a pass rusher. And finally, the most valuable position in the modern era of football is obviously the quarterback. Overall, the general value of the quarterback position has seen an increase over the past years because of the changes that the sport has been through that we've previously discussed. But overall, the quarterback has always had a very important role in the success of teams in the past in this sport's history. Quarterbacks are mainly responsible for being the leader of the offense, making sure his offensive teammates know what play is being called, telling the offense the reads and checks are, and of course, being able to throw the ball downfield accurately, on time, efficiently, with decent arm strength to be able to move the team down the field to score points. A competent quarterback can help improve the team's outlook and performance immediately. That impact alone plays a major role in evaluating the value of this position. And overall, you've seen over many years of this great sport that, in general, teams that have excellent quarterbacks, or at least competent high-level quarterbacks, have had much room to be able to actually compete and win championships in this game. So that basically just proves their value right there. And it's never going to change. It's probably always going to be this way as the game gets softer, as the game shifts to more an offensive game, as the league changes and shifts more to scoring points. This is the way it's going to be for the as long as we can see it. And this is just the way it is. It's going to be more of an offensive game, period. So this is the way it's going to be. So that concludes my list. What you think of it? Did you agree, disagree? Leave comments below, share the video, and get in the game with Psycho Schematics. Believe